So thank you, Jean, for those introductions, and welcome to the Accessible Voting and Voter Photo Identification presentation. So our presenters are me, I'm Sarah Linsky with the Wisconsin Elections Commission, Jennifer Haar with the City of Madison Clerk's Office, and Randy and Virginia Black, who are voters in the City of Madison, who will share their experiences later on in the presentation. Today's presentation will cover the following topics. First, we'll talk about who is eligible to vote in Wisconsin. We'll follow up that discussion with voter registration. In this section, we will talk about how voter registration works and point out important registration information that all voters need to know. We'll also discuss proof of residence, which is documentation that voters need to bring when they are registering to vote. We will then discuss the voter photo ID requirements and what photo IDs you can use to vote in Wisconsin. Next is Election Day, where we will go over the process to follow when voting at the polls and where accommodations are possible. We'll also discuss absentee voting, which occurs before Election Day, and we'll talk about how and when you can vote by absentee ballot. After that, I'll take questions for about 10 minutes and then hand it over to Jennifer and Randy and Virginia Black to discuss their voting experience. So let's get started by outlining who is eligible to vote in Wisconsin. To vote in Wisconsin, you must be at least 18 years of age by the time of the election. You must also be a U.S. citizen. And you must also reside at your current address for at least 10 days prior to the election. If you move less than 10 days before an election, you may still be eligible to vote from your former address. You are not eligible to vote in Wisconsin if you are a felon who is still on paper. What this means is if you are still serving any portion of your felony sentence, including probation, you are not eligible to vote in Wisconsin. You also cannot vote if a judge has ordered you incompetent specifically for voting purposes. Another lesser-known requirement is that you cannot vote if you have placed a bet or a wager on the outcome of the election. And of course, you're not eligible to vote if you've already voted in that election. You can only vote once in each election. Next, we'll take a look at the first step of the voting process, which is voter registration. The first note to make about registration is that all voters in Wisconsin must be registered in order to vote. If you're voting for the first time, you must register to vote. If you're already registered, but your name or address has changed, you will need to re-register. There is one exception to this rule, and that is if you are an active member of the U.S. Armed Services, you do not need to register in order to vote in Wisconsin. To register, you would need to fill out a voter registration form. The easiest way to do this is by going to myvote.wi.gov. Here you're going to be guided through the registration process step by step. You'll be able to register completely online without needing to print or mail anything if you have a valid Wisconsin driver's license or Wisconsin state ID card and are able to match your name, date of birth, driver's license or ID number, and address with the Wisconsin DMV. This option is available online 20 days or more before an election. In the 19 days before an election, you will still be able to register at your clerk's office or at the polls on election day. Another option is to use the EL 131 form, which is found on elections.wi.gov under Forms. You'll also need to mail a proof of residence document with your application, which we'll get into here in a minute. Finally, you can register to vote on election day at the polls. They will have the form that you need there, but again, you'll need to bring that proof of residence document. Voters no longer need to register to vote with special registration deputies. If a voter registers to vote by filling out a form at a voter registration drive, you'll need to include a copy of your proof of residence document with the signed form that would then be sent to your municipal clerk's office. All right, so now we'll get into proof of residence. When you're registering to vote, you will need to show or provide a document that proves where you live in Wisconsin. And that document is called your proof of residence. It's important to remember that proof of residence proves where you live and is only used when you're registering to vote, while proof of identification or photo ID proves who you are and is used when you're getting your ballot on election day or when you're absentee voting. There is specific documents that can be used as proof of residence. Some of the most common documents are a valid, unexpired Wisconsin driver's license or Wisconsin state ID card with your current address, a document issued by any unit of government, a utility bill, and that can be a bill for any of your utilities, including electricity, water, gas, or phone. And that document is valid 90 days after issuance. A bank statement can also be used. However, a credit card statement, even if it's from your bank, cannot be used. It's important to note that the list that you see here is not a complete list. If you have a question about whether or not your document will qualify as a valid proof of residence, don't wait until Election Day to find out. Contact your clerk or the Wisconsin Elections Commission before you go to register. No matter what document you choose, the document must include your name and your current address. The proof of residence document does not need to be a paper copy when you're registering to vote in person. You can show your election official a proof of residence using an electronic device such as your phone or tablet. Just make sure that if you're presenting it electronically, that it is easy to see on a small screen. Next, we'll get into photo ID. Whether you're voting at the polls or by absentee ballot, most voters will need to provide a photo ID. Many people already have the photo ID that they need to vote. Important note to make here is that there is no separate voter ID card. Photo IDs for voting are all existing forms of ID that many people already have. There's no special voter ID card. There are a number of government issued IDs that can be used to vote. We're going to go over each of those. The first and most popular document that can be used as photo ID for voting purposes is a Wisconsin driver's license. You can use a Wisconsin driver's license even if it has expired, but it must have expired since the last general election, which is currently November 8th, 2016. The next is a Wisconsin state identification card. The same rules apply for an ID card. If your ID is expired, you can still use it to vote, even if it expired since the last general election, which is currently November 8th, 2016. A U.S. military ID issued to a member of the Uniformed Services can also be used. This is an ID issued by the U.S. Department of Defense. You can still use this ID if it is expired, but since the last general election. There's also a U.S. passport document. There's two types of passports you might have. One is a passport book and the other is a passport card. Both of these documents can be used as photo ID, but if it is expired, it must have expired since the last general election, which is currently November 8th, 2016.
All right, I see some Q&As here that some people lost the presentation. Unfortunately, we lost power there for a second. If anybody could send me a Q&A and see that they can hear us and see us again. I hear we're back. All right, so we'll get back into photo ID here. So we're back where we're talking about the Wisconsin driver's license photo receipt, the Wisconsin state ID card photo receipt, or an ID petition process receipt. These are documents that are issued by the Wisconsin DMV. You may have noticed that recently when you go to get a new license or ID at the DMV, you no longer get your card that same day. Instead, the DMV will give you a receipt with all of that information that will be on your driver's license or state ID that you can use your driver's license or state ID receipt for voting for 45 days while your actual card is being mailed to you. You can use the ID petition process receipt for voting purposes for up to 180 days after the date that it was issued. Up next is the certificate of naturalization. A certificate of naturalization can be used as photo ID, but it must be unexpired and can only be used within 2 years of issuance. An ID issued by the Department of Veteran Affairs can also be used. It must be unexpired or have no expiration date. And then our last one here is that a tribal identification card can be used if it was issued by a federally recognized tribe that resides in Wisconsin. It can still be used for voting if it is expired. You can also use a student ID card to vote. It must be issued by a Wisconsin college, university, or technical college. If you are using a student ID, you will need to be sure that you also bring a document with you that proves that you are currently enrolled. The document could be an enrollment verification letter, a fee receipt, a class schedule, or a student housing list. To use the student ID for voting, the ID must show your name, photo, and signature. It must also show the date the card was issued and the date the card expired. The dates cannot be more than 2 years apart. A student ID can still be used if it is expired. So we've talked about all of the acceptable photo IDs for voting in Wisconsin. No matter which one of these IDs you use for voting, there are 3 things that your poll workers will be looking for on your ID. First, they'll look at the photo to see that it reasonably resembles you. Appearances can change. People change the color of their hair, or they gain and lose weight. Make sure that your photo reasonably looks like you before Election Day. Second, the poll worker is going to look to see that the name on your ID conforms to the name on the poll book. It doesn't have to be an exact match. For example, if your ID says Robert J. Smith, but you're registered as Bob Smith, that's okay. Your name will conform. Third, of the poll workers will be looking to make sure that your ID falls into the acceptable expiration dates. You do not need to have a current address in your photo ID for voting purposes. The only time that you would prove your address is when you're registering. When you use your photo ID, the poll worker is not looking at your address. They're just verifying it as photo ID. There are a few photo IDs that can be used for voting that don't have a photo. There's a citation that is issued by law enforcement when a person's driver's license is taken from them. There's also a notice of intent to revoke or suspend, which is issued by law enforcement. Then there's the Wisconsin driver's license or Wisconsin state ID card without a photo, and that's available to voters with a religious objection to being photographed. Most people already have a photo ID that can be used for voting. If you don't have the ID that you need, you can get a Wisconsin state ID card for free at your nearby DMV. If you would like a free ID for voting, you will need to fill out a form at the DMV and be sure to check free ID for voting. You will need to bring a few papers with you to get your ID, like a birth certificate, social security card, and a utility bill. If you don't have a birth certificate or other documents, the DMV can still help you get a free ID for voting using their petition process. You can still obtain a state of Wisconsin ID receipt for voting after one visit to the DMV using their petition process. To summarize, most people already have the photo ID they need to vote in Wisconsin, but here's a photo of all the acceptable forms of photo ID for voting. So next we're going to talk about absentee voting. So now we're getting into where you're actually casting your ballot. Absentee voting is a method of voting available to all electors for any reason in which you would complete your ballot before Election Day. Some people refer to it as early voting, but in Wisconsin we call it absentee voting. Just like registration, there are deadlines that apply to absentee voting. You can make a request to your municipal clerk to have a ballot mailed, emailed, or faxed to you at any time. Ballots typically become available 47 days before a federal election and 21 days before state and local elections. You can make your request in writing to your clerk by mail, email, fax, or delivery. The clerk will send the ballot to the voter. Once the voter receives the ballot, they then have until Election Day to get the ballot in the mail. Your ballot must be postmarked by Election Day and received by the clerk no later than Election Day to be counted. You can request and complete your ballot right in your municipal clerk's office. In-person absentee hours vary, so contact your municipal clerk to find out the dates and hours of absentee voting in your area. Please remember that before you request an absentee ballot, you must first be registered to vote. And when you're requesting your ballot, don't forget you'll need to include a copy of your photo ID with your request. Your municipal clerk cannot send you a ballot until they receive a copy of your acceptable photo ID. Once you send a copy of your photo ID to your clerk with your ballot request, you don't need to provide it again when you're requesting an absentee ballot by mail for future elections. The best way to make your request is to use the absentee ballot request form. You can find this on myvote.wi.gov by clicking Vote Absentee, or by using the EL-121 form found on elections.wi.gov under Forms. If you're a member of the U.S. Armed Services, you have another option to receive an absentee ballot. You can request and receive your absentee ballot through myvote.wi.gov. This option is only available to military voters and permanent overseas voters. Military and permanent overseas voters do not need to provide photo ID with their absentee ballot request. And definitely confined voters, or voters who have a hard time getting to the polls due to age, illness, or disability, can request that a ballot be automatically sent to them for every election. They will continue to receive a ballot for every election until they fail to return one. Indefinitely confined voters are not required to send photo ID with their request. Instead, indefinitely confined voters will have a witness sign their absentee ballot certification envelope to verify the voter's identity. All other types of voters can request a ballot either for one specific election, or you can request that they be sent to you for an entire calendar year. Once you receive and complete your ballot, it is important that you make sure you complete your absentee certificate envelope. This includes your signature and the signature of your witness. If you do not complete the certificate correctly, you and your witness will have to come to the clerk's office by election day to correct it in order for your vote to be counted. If you do not complete the envelope and do not fix certification by election day, your ballot will not be counted. Finally, many voters choose to go to the polls to cast their ballot on election day itself. There is a process that you will need to follow at the polls in order to receive and cast your ballot. Finding your polling place is the first step of that process. Each Wisconsin voter is assigned to a specific polling place based on their address. To find your polling place, visit myvote.wi.gov or call your local clerk or the Wisconsin Elections Commission to find your polling place. When you get to the polls, you will need to register if you haven't already. Remember that you only need to register if you are a first-time voter or you've changed your name or address since the last time you registered. All right, so once you get to the polls, you will need to state, show, and sign. To state, you will state your name and address to the poll worker. You must state your full name as you are registered and your current address. Then you will show your acceptable photo ID. Remember that the poll workers are looking at your ID to see that your picture reasonably resembles you, that your name conforms to the name on the poll book, and that your ID isn't expired or has expired within the acceptable time frame. You do not need to have a current address on your photo ID. Then you'll be asked to sign the poll book next to your name and address. You should sign the poll book using your typical signature, whether that is your full printed name or an X. If you're unable to sign the poll book due to a disability, let the poll worker know and you will be exempt from the signing requirement. Then you will receive your ballot. You will then take your ballot into a private booth or use the accessible voting equipment to make your selections. If you don't have your photo ID on election day, you can still cast what is called a provisional ballot. You'll have until 4 p.m. on the Friday after the election to bring your ID to the municipal clerk's office in order for your ballot to be counted. There are accommodations at polling places for voters with disabilities. We run audits on polling locations to verify that polling locations are meeting ADA standards. Every polling place in Wisconsin is required to be accessible and have accessible voting equipment. You can go to elections.wi.gov to find out which equipment is used in your local municipality. There's also curbside voting as an option, which is where a poll worker will conduct voting at your car if you're unable to get into the polling place. If you're unable to sign the poll book due to a physical disability, you can be exempt from that requirement. And if you would like to have somebody assist you in the voting process, you may bring anybody of your choosing as your assister. Just be sure to let your poll worker know so that your assister can also sign the poll book. All right. Don't forget there's always changes at polling locations in every election, so please be patient and kind to your poll workers. All right, with that, I'm going to see what questions we've had coming in, and then we'll get into our voter experience. All right, I see there's a question if a student ID from an out-of-state school can be used. The answer to that question is that it can't. All student IDs need to be a Wisconsin college, university, or technical college. There's another question if it's necessary for overseas voters to request absentee ballots for each election. Overseas voters would need to request, similarly to how voters would request here, they can request per election or they can request on an annual basis, but they would need to up on that annual basis. We've got a question here. If out-of-state students, how would they vote? Do they vote in their home state? Typically, if they they have the option, they can either register here if they have all of the necessary documentation and vote here, but some do choose to vote absentee in their home state. I have a question here that if you vote absentee, can you vote at the polls? The answer to that is you couldn't cast both ballots, but if you request an absentee ballot and you've completed your ballot, you can bring it to your polling location to be dropped off and to be counted, provided you have all of the necessary envelope information completed as well. All right, see if there's any other questions coming in here. I do have a question that's reminding people where to call to make a complaint if you have accessibility concerns. I don't have the number in front of me, but we can provide that in the materials after. I also see a question on how to use accessible voting equipment. I believe our voters here are going to get into that in a second. I have a question here on the provisional ballots. There's 3 situations for provisional ballots. It is if you don't have your photo ID available, if you're not able to provide your Wisconsin driver's license number, though you do have one. And the third one's escaping me right now, but the second part to that question was if you don't have POR available, is that a provisional ballot situation? That's not a provisional ballot situation. That is a registration situation. So if you don't have the proper POR, that is where the registration process would stop. The provisional ballot is a situation you'd get to beyond registration. Yeah, I've got Jean asking a question here of when are the elections this year. The primary is August 14th, so that's coming up here in a bit. I believe the 20 days before that you would need you can register online is July 25th. And then the November elections is November 6th, I believe. I do see a question here. It looks like how does somebody vote when they are voting curbside? That process works a little bit differently in every polling location. Typically, if you do plan to vote curbside, I would notify your municipal clerk and set up a time and just let them know that is the way that you would like to go about it. So contact your clerk and let them know. Typically, you can set a time and have it be prepared before you arrive. All right, with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer to speak here with our voters from the City of Madison Clerk's Office.
All right, I'm hoping that we've got everything set up and that you guys are able to hear me and hear Randy as well, who is joining us today. All right, I think Randy and I are both online. Randy, do you want to say hi again, and then we'll ask some people in the chat box if they wouldn't mind letting us know if they can hear both of us?
Okay. My name is Randy Black. It's indeed a pleasure to be a part of this presentation. I hope the folks out there in webinar land can hear both of us. If you cannot, please let us know. Or if you can, please let us know.
All right, so feel free to continue to add any questions to the chat box while we are speaking with Randy, and we will make sure to get to those after the questions with Randy. So I want to thank Randy Black for being here today along with his wife Virginia. We really appreciate having you both here and being able to share your experiences with voting in the City of Madison with some of the assistive devices that we've had. One of my first questions for you, Randy, is how did you first learn about assistive devices for voting, such as the Express Vote, which is currently being used in the City of Madison, or its predecessor, the AutoMark?
Well, I learned about the venerable AutoMark back in the days when it was being tested along with other types of equipment for voting. And at that time, the AutoMark was truly the best machine to have. But it did have reliability problems. There were times when it let you know if you didn't use it enough. And that came up when you tried to vote and you tried to print out your ballot and the ballot came out blank, or it came out so faint that it couldn't be read. And that would be a real pain, especially at the voter sites, voting sites, polling places. And so that was part of the reason that my wife and I have chosen over time to vote absentee. A, we believe that absentee voting is really important to do. And B, we knew that while poll workers work hard and do a great job, for us, and it was a lot less stress to vote at the clerk's office. And we knew that the folks there would know how to solve any problems we could possibly bring up to them. But that early on, a friend of mine was involved in looking and reviewing the equipment that was available from various vendors, and the Automark was picked. And as I said, it was a good pick at the time. The express vote option is now being used. It definitely is an improvement. It works really well. It seems much more reliable and much more stable. The only thing that can be difficult is, like the Automark, doing a write-in vote can be, it takes time because you have to get used to using like a cell phone keypad to enter your letters one at a time. You can't just dictate something that says, I want to vote for Joe Schmo for county sheriff. You have to type in Joe Schmo, and it takes time to do that. And not everyone wants to take that time. But for doing a ballot where you vote for the candidates, I believe that the express vote is a really useful option. It's an accessible option, and most importantly, it's a private option. I don't have to tell someone else who I'm voting for. If I want to vote for the right not to vote party, that's my business, and I have the right to vote for that should it actually be an option. But thankfully, it's not. So, but I'm very proud that accessibility in the city of Madison has the priority that it has. It makes you truly feel like a first-class citizen, and that's important.
Thank you. One of my other questions for you is, prior to, I guess, the advent of using assistive devices for voting in the city of Madison, how did you cast your votes?
Well, back in the olden days, as they say, you could use a poll worker, and a lot of my friends did, and I'm sure I did. Although, you know, when I turned 18, I know I became a voter, but I honestly don't remember how I voted back then and what alternative techniques I used. But when my wife and I moved to Madison, we got to use those big, very large voting machines in booths you went into. And so I think I used a poll worker once until they tried to tell me that maybe I didn't want to vote for who I thought about voting for, or why would you want to do that? And so after that happened, my wife and I decided that we would go in together, and while my vote wasn't totally private, I trusted that she would assist me in a way that I felt confident that the ballot would be filled out the way I wished.
Thank you. After having used the express vote for a couple of elections now, what's some of your favorite features?
Well, the speech is, I think, better than the Automark speech was. I'm trying to, in some ways, when I first told me it changed, it's very much like, gee, it's just kind of like the Automark. It doesn't look all that different, but, you know, I've only used it a couple of times, and memory fades with time. So, but I think the speech is better on it. It just seems to be a more reliable product, and I could, you know, turn the speech volume up and down, so I didn't have to have it blaring where everyone could hear who I was voting for, or have it so quiet that it couldn't be heard. So it just seems to be a more reliable product. It's taken the Automark and just made it a machine that is much easier for anyone to use. And in fact, my wife has chosen to vote using the express vote because it is accessible, not just for me, but it also is accessible for her. And if it's okay, I'd like to have my wife talk about her experience with accessible voting and why she uses the machine, because she doesn't have to. She could use anything that she could just use a regular ballot, but she chooses to use the voting machine, and I'd like her to tell you why.
My name is Virginia Mayo Black. I am proud to be married to my husband, who is blind. Part of why we made a decision to vote at our city clerk's office is because, as wonderful as poll workers are, there were times when more attention was focused to my husband's service dog than to my husband. That can be very uncomfortable. That, to me, is part of the whole accessibility issue. As my husband has indicated, we go back to the times when we used what we lovingly referred to as the boat anchor machine, the machine that poll workers always had a problem with. And as people who have participated in the City of Madison's poll worker training for a number of times, we always urged a number of things, one of which was poll workers, when you're at that site, use the accessibility equipment. That way you can provide triage, that way you feel the comfort level, that way you know what the experience is, and you can say, this is not the most private location, let's make it a little more private. What we have now with the express vote, it just sort of appeared for us when we went to the clerk's office, or at least that's my recollection. My sense was that this is pretty good. It's a huge, huge improvement over our good old boat anchor. More importantly, I have confidence as the sighted spouse who wants my husband to have all of his civil rights, that his vote is going to be treated just like my vote. He's got privacy. He can write in if he wants. He can make his own decisions. And despite the fact that while we disagreed over candidates when voting, what he's wanted has always been my goal. He now controls that. That's what way voting should be. Voting is so important that you need to have your integrity, the integrity of that vote protected. Why am I using that system now? As somebody who's over 65, I'm starting to go part by part. My knees are bad, my back is bad. Slowly but surely, as somebody who's mobility challenged, I want the comfort of that machine. It's easy, it's fast, and if we're lucky, we can get back to our motor vehicle without having a parking ticket placed on it in downtown Madison. And it's also a pleasure to deal with the clerks. That's in part why we vote at our absentee at our clerk's office. It's great technology. I've watched this issue for a number of years. Decades, in fact, as a reporter and as somebody who worked at the old Wisconsin Elections Commission. It's nice to see it there. What I want is for more folks with different abilities to flood vote, to get in there and vote. There's nothing more important than that in that context. If there are challenges, bring them to the clerks, because as somebody who's worked with municipal clerks, they're the best. They are top-notch individuals who really care. And that's what's important to me, not only as my own, as a voter myself, but as somebody who is in love with a disabled person who wants the same civil rights for him. I'm going to hand things back to my husband because he's way more elegant than I am.
Thank you, Virginia.
Gee, I guess she's not going to join my Right Not to Vote party anytime soon.
Randy, was there anything else that you wanted to add about using the express vote machines, or why people should consider it as a viable option?
Well, I think it's important to show that it's not a piece of second-class equipment out there for the disabled to use and, just have it hiding somewhere. It's a viable way to make your feelings known in an election, and it can be used by myself, who is blind, people with other kinds of disabilities, or the average Joe voter who might just need a little larger screen to look at so they can see who they're voting for. And the more folks who use it, the more likely it is that other municipalities will have accessible voting machines that really work. I mean, there's some stuff out there, or at least that has been out there, it wasn't too good. I think at one time somebody tried to hook up something to a cassette recorder. That was way back in the day. I don't think it was too accessible, but there were some strange options that were available. Hopefully the express vote is really taking over because it's a good quality piece of equipment.
Thank you so much. I did want to mention, I think the question had come up a little earlier. You can see on your screen, the slide is just showing a screenshot of what the express vote looks like. I wanted to let everybody know what we're doing in the City of Madison to get our poll workers and to get, I guess, just the general public comfortable with this new machinery. We've been holding, for example, mock elections where businesses or groups can request the clerk's office to come out, and we can run a mock election using all of the equipment, including the express vote. And I think that this really gives people a chance to get comfortable with it prior to Election Day. We also are really pushing use of the express vote during our early in-person absentee voting here in the City of Madison. We also got great training materials from the company that makes the express vote. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out to the City of Madison, and we will certainly.
Well, as long as I've got the mic, I do have a couple of questions. And one thing that I know comes up very often in election integrity is whether your vote is secure. So does this machine have any issues with vote security?
That's a great question. This machine simply marks your ballot according to what you've told the machine to mark. It doesn't count anything, and it doesn't store any scans, for example. It simply marks the ballot as if you had a pen in hand. And then it produces, you're right, a paper copy, which you would then feed into the tabulator to actually be scanned and counted.
Because it really is just another ballot. It's not anything special that has to be done ahead of time.
Correct. There's nothing exceptionally different about this ballot than a paper ballot somebody would fill out by hand.
The only other question I had, I know before during Sarah's wonderful presentation, at some point passports were brought up. And I'm assuming that the passport deadline is the same as anything else. If you have an expired passport, does the deadline still go back to the November 2016, or is a passport unique?
That was correct. For the passport, it can be expired, but it has to be since the November 2016 election.
Sweet, that's what I thought. So if anyone has any questions for either my wife or I, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, we have been really happy to be a part of this seminar, and we thank all of you folks for attending either today or via the archive.
Looks like there's a question in the chat box. How do you request to use the accessible voting options at your polling place? Do you have to prove that you need it? No, you do not have to prove that you would need or have to use an accessible voting option. All you need to do is let your municipal clerk know, especially for something like curbside voting, so that they can be prepared at the polling place to come out to your vehicle when you arrive, so that there's no lag in time when you've driven up to when they come out. Otherwise, you can simply go in and ask to use the express vote, for example, here in Madison, or to use the assistive devices. There's nothing that, you have to make a general announcement to the whole public. You can ask a poll worker.
My wife uses it because she wants to. She doesn't have to prove anything, say anything. She just has to say, I want to use the express vote. And everyone says, thank you. Why, surely, go back here.
While we're looking to see if there are any other questions, here, look, this person read my mind. Can you get free rides to the polls? Here in the city of Madison, Union Cab Company partners with the city to offer free cab rides on election day from your home, for example, to the polling place and back. Unfortunately, they don't allow for other stops, so you couldn't go vote and then go to the grocery store and then home, but they will for free give you a ride to and from the polls. You may have to check with your local municipality to see if that sort of thing is offered in your area, but it's offered here in Madison.
Yeah, no, I did see a question earlier for homeless registration. So if you are homeless and looking to register to vote, there is a form that you can get from a certified agency certifying that you're homeless but that you reside in this general area. So you can use that type of document to complete your registration and then continue on to vote. I see another question about an elections day manual or admin manual. We, for any clerks or poll workers on the call, there is an elections day manual that you can find on elections.wi.gov. We're just looking through the questions to see if there's any that we missed. There's a question about how to use a accessible voting machine, and like Jennifer said, that you would request your poll worker that I want to use that, and anybody is able to use that machine without providing any kind of proof. Everybody is able to use it, but I will again say that not every municipality uses the express vote. There's a lot of other options out there. If you go to elections.wi.gov, we do have a directory of all of the different types of equipment used in each location so that you can get an idea of what will be there before you go.
And I can't speak for how it works on the sighted end of things, but when you put your ballot into the machine, if the headphones are plugged in, you will be getting speech instructions that will tell you how to do your ballot step by step. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Would you repeat that?
To move around on the ballot, you use
the arrow keys,
left, right.
up, down, left, right. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It looks like there's a question to see if you can get speakers to speak about this at a meeting. I won't speak for anybody else in the group, but if you contact the Wisconsin Elections Commission, it's possible that we can set something up. We do have a lot of partnerships with different groups that also assist in these kinds of things. All right, someone's asking to see if we could include a sample form for the documents that the homeless might use to get registered. I can see if we have one at the state level. Otherwise, I can see if I can work with the agency to get one available. And I'll give a little plug here for the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition. They're happy to speak or provide any trainings on the information that you saw here today. One final question here. When people are absentee voting, the question is, will they be a postage paid envelope? I believe that an envelope is included that has postage paid as you receive your ballot that you can then return your ballot in. So that is all covered there.
Okay, we'll go ahead and just wrap up here. First, I'd like to thank Jennifer, Sarah, Randy, and Virginia for coming and sharing with us their experiences with voting. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to attend. As I said at the beginning, we'll be sending out the archived link mid to late next week for anyone to use, and we'll include any web links that Sarah mentioned during her presentation. Just as a reminder about some upcoming events here at the Council, we have a Dining in the Dark on July 12th in the Madison area. Vignette Dining is actually doing a vegetarian dining in the dark experience for people. For any of you who are in the Manitowoc, Sheboygan area, we're having a low vision fair at UW Manitowoc on August 10th. And then on August 14th, for those of you who are in Appleton, Ginger Roots again is doing a Dining in the Dark event for us there. All wonderful food, having experienced both the Vignette Dining and the Ginger Roots folks. They do a great job. All of those events are listed on our webpage at www.wcblind.org. Thanks to everyone, and have a good afternoon. Bye for now.
So